Once upon a time, there was a little boy who loved fairy tales. He loved them because in a fairy tale, the darkness always has a shape, it always has a name, and even the smallest hero, even a boy with nothing but his imagination and his will, can defeat it. He loved them because in a fairy tale, no matter how lost you got, and no matter how deep into the woods the story takes you, there is always a way home. And then, his brother died, and his family started to fall apart, and the woods got very, very dark. So he did what children do when the world becomes too much. He found a story, he gave everyone a role, and he decided that if he could just get the ending right, if he could just be brave enough and clever enough and believe hard enough, he could fix it all. But he didn't know that the story already found him. Hey everyone, I'm Nikanak, and I make videos about everything I question and overthink, and today I want to explore the idea that what if Fromville is a manifestation designed to make an intangible evil tangible for children. So without further ado, let's get into it. It all starts with Jim and Tabitha, who were planning a divorce because after 14 months of trying to hold their family together after the death of their youngest son Thomas, it just wasn't working anymore. The road trip we see them on in the very first episode was their last hurrah as the Matthews family. Before they came home and told the kids it was over. And while Julie already knew, I think Ethan, given how emotionally perceptive he is throughout the show, probably sensed something was deeply wrong too. And with the weight of Thomas's death still looming over him and his family, he did what children sometimes do when the world becomes too much. He told himself a story. But why a story? Why not something else? Well, I believe because Ethan needed a shape, a figure, something more tangible rather than something ambiguous like divorce or death. And there are actually two cognitive frameworks that explain exactly why he does this. The first is magical thinking, the belief that your own thoughts and feelings can directly change what happens in the real world, and the second, what grows from this seed, is narrative coping, where someone who cannot make sense of a loss builds a story around it instead, to give the chaos once again a shape, and to restore some sense of control. Now in the very first episode, on their way to Yellowstone, Julie is playing with Ethan, and she kills his toy Norman in the story they are telling together. Ethan cannot accept that. He needs Norman to come back. So Tabitha steps in and tells him, well, there is no such thing as monsters, and if there is no such thing as monsters, then Norman is still alive. Now, instead of just comforting him, she gave him a whole new perspective, because she explained that monsters are the only reason death exists, and if there are no monsters, then nobody truly stays gone. But then they arrive in Fromville, where the monsters are very real, and suddenly everything Tabitha said made sense. If the monsters exist, the story exists, and if the story exists, he is the one who gets to decide how it ends. And through this mechanism of magical thinking and narrative coping, I think he unconsciously connects his family to Fromville, because his need, grief, his desperate wish to hold his family together inside a story that made sense resonated with this place. And Fromville needed a storyteller, and Ethan, well, he needed a quest, and somehow these two things found each other on a road to Yellowstone. Now once the Matthews do arrive, Ethan does not react to Fromville the way anyone else does.
I think it's probably a quest.
What?
Like a hero's quest? Like Norman had to go onto the Lake of Tears? We probably have to save somebody if we want to go home. That's what Norman had to do. Oh, I know. He's got to do his part right now.
His part?
Of the quest. He's probably doing something pretty important right now. Symbols are important, especially on a quest.
Yeah.
But you have to figure out if they're good symbols or bad symbols.
What do you mean?
Sometimes it would make you do bad things. You're a story walker.
What?
Someone who can visit chapters of the story that already happened.
He also tells Tabitha in season 3 that everyone was so scared there was no time to be angry. I wish it could be like that again. And it's a bit devastating when you think about what he is actually saying. He misses the early days in Fromville because back then the fear was so overwhelming that nobody had the energy to fight with each other. Nobody was pulling away, nobody was getting divorced, everyone needed everyone. And Ethan, who arrived in a family that was about to fall apart, found something in that collective terror that actually felt like safety to him. Now for my theory especially, and just as a cool observation, I think the most important thing Ethan says is in season 1. The family, Julie, Tabitha, and Ethan, play a game about what they want when they get home. And Ethan says, when I get home, I want us to be happy like we are here. Because unlike everything else he says, which is about the quest and the roles and the story, this one is just about him. And it tells you that Fromville is not entirely a nightmare to Ethan, but rather the closest thing to a family he has felt in the past 14 months. And like with any theory, there has to be a pattern, and I am fully convinced Ethan is not the only child this has happened to. Now we know from the show that Tabitha and Miranda were both driven to Fromville with a specific purpose, to help free the children who were sacrificed. And I find it really interesting that both of these women, who came here to save children, maybe without even realizing it, ended up putting their own kids on the back burner. And the reason I mention this is because a lot of people draw a parallel between Victor and Ethan. And they're not wrong, but after my most recent rewatch, I actually think the more important mirror for Ethan is Eloise, Victor's younger sister, and I think Julie's mirror is actually Victor. Let me explain. Think about how Victor processes things. He draws everything, every person, every creature, every event goes into a drawing. When he wants to forget something, he buries those drawings. When he needs to remember, he goes back to them. His whole relationship with memory and trauma is about documenting what already happened. And Julie, I believe, is doing the exact same thing as a story walker. We see her revisiting past chapters to witness what already exists.
You know how sometimes you dream and you forget, but then later you start to remember and you realize that it wasn't a dream and that all of it maybe really happens.
Ethan, however, is completely different. I would say he feels more like a generator, someone who moves the story forward, be it assigning a role or naming things, and I feel very strongly that Eloise was a generator too. Now, from what Henry tells us, Miranda proposed they take acid together for old time's sake on Henry's birthday, and after that one trip, she became completely consumed by visions of Fromville. Maybe this caused a rift between them, and if it did, then little Eloise was watching her family fall apart, just like Ethan watched his. So my theory is that Eloise, seeing her mother consumed by visions and her father gone or potentially absent, created her own coping narrative, her own desperate wish to hold her family together inside a story that made sense. And Fromville, which was already there and already waiting, responded to that the same way it responded to Ethan. A child with a broken family and nowhere to put their grief reaches out, and Fromville reaches back. I would even go as far as to say this whole thing centers around the mothers more than anyone else. Both Eloise and Ethan ran after their mothers. When Miranda left for the lighthouse, Eloise followed her into the woods and vanished. When Tabitha left for the lighthouse, Ethan tried to follow her too, but he was stopped. And although we have yet to find out what actually happened to Eloise, I think this ambiguity, this secret, is absolutely deliberate. And I think that is exactly where the man in yellow comes in. Now in season 2, Ethan hands Victor a drawing he made of himself, and in that drawing, the figure is wearing a white jacket and pants with a yellow shirt underneath. Now I might be wrong, but this is what I think the color selection here represents. The white suit on the outside is how Ethan is perceived. Pure, innocent, a child, and the version of Ethan that everyone sees. But underneath the white jacket, hidden under that outer layer, there is a yellow shirt. And we all know that by the end of season 3, yellow in the context of this show is anything but a cheerful color. And in color theory, yellow sits in this very interesting space between warmth and warning. It's the color of the sun, but it's also the color of decay. Think of leaves turning yellow just before they die. So when Ethan draws himself in season 2, I think he is subconsciously showing us exactly where that innocence, light, purity stops and the obsession takes over. And I think that it's honestly a warning that, this isn't just a childhood dream. It's not a fairy tale. I think it's turning into a full-blown fixation for him. And then look at the man in yellow when we finally see him in the season 3 finale. The rot is on the outside. It is everything. It is what he is. And his shirt underneath is white. Just that little bit of white. What is left of whatever he used to be before the yellow took over completely. And while the innocence, maybe is not gone, but it is buried so deep under everything else that it is barely visible anymore. So what I'm trying to say is that when Ethan drew that picture, I think he was prophesizing. The man in yellow is what happens to Ethan the moment he stops believing he can ever go home to a fixed family. But what actually causes that? What causes that event to make him stop believing. What's the catalyst? We have to talk about Jim. In the season 3 finale, when the man in yellow kills Jim, allegedly, I don't think for a second it's entirely about just Tabitha digging a hole or remembering her past lives. I think it's more about Ethan. Now, to put Ethan on the path of no return, just like Eloise, is to destroy the very thing both of them are trying to protect. Now, if my theory is correct, that break was supposed to happen for Ethan with Tabitha at the lighthouse, just like it did with Miranda. But because that didn't work, Tabitha got out successfully and came back, Ethan was stopped by Tian Chen, the story had to pivot. It had to find a new sacrifice. So, it chose Jim. And more importantly, this death, if true, creates the one thing that Ethan can't storytell his way out of, a family that isn't whole. And this is the exact moment where Tabitha's logic finally fails him. Back in season 1, when she told him that if monsters aren't real, then death isn't real. But Ethan is looking at the monsters, he knows they're real, which means for the first time he has to accept that his father is truly permanently gone. And this is exactly where the fairy tale stops being a coping mechanism and starts being a prison where he can't write a new chapter where his family is fixed and Jim is back alive. And thus starts the path to the man in yellow. Now, to conclude, Ethan Matthews arrived in Fromville as a little boy who loved fairy tales, who believed that if you were brave enough, clever enough, and believed hard enough, you could fix everything. And for a while, Fromville gave him that. A quest, a family, a story worth telling. But fairy tales have a dark side too. And the ones that do not end well usually start exactly like this, with a child who needed something so badly that the world rearranged itself to give it to him, and then slowly took everything else instead. But at the end of the day, this is just a theory, but I do want to know what you guys think. Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Do you completely agree? Do you completely disagree, screaming at your computer being like, Nika, are you out of your mind? Do you have your own theories you would want to share? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you're still here, well, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon for season 4. Till next time, bye!